Hi, my name is Finola Colgan. I'm Development Officer with Mental Health Ireland, and I'm delighted to be able to talk to you about mental health and the 5 ways to well-being, and to have gotten this lovely invitation from Moocall, and I'm looking forward to doing this session over the next little while and hope you will enjoy it. So you're very welcome. A little bit about myself insofar in relation to farming, that I live in a farm in Westmeath. I have a husband for a farmer for a husband. So I have a fairly reasonable insight into, the challenges about farming, family life in a farm, farmer well-being, and I'm hoping to be able to share that with you as we go along. So, does this sound familiar? We are so overwhelmed with things these days that our lives are more or less cluttered. I believe it's this, rather than shortness of time, that gives us that feeling of hurry and almost helplessness. Everyone is hurrying and usually just a little late. Notice the faces of the people who rush past us on the street or our country roads. They nearly all have a strained, harassed look, and anyone you meet will tell you there's not time for anything anymore. It does sound familiar, doesn't it? Can you identify with it? I certainly can. But the important thing to think about this, and would you believe that this was actually written in 1924, almost 100 years ago, by Laura Ingalls, the writer of Little House on the Prairie and many other well-known books. And the question is, what has changed in almost a century? Because 100 years later, we are still talking about being stressed, strained, feeling harassed, worried, and anxious. But we're more informed and we can do a lot more to mind that overall sense of farmer health, well-being, and indeed our mental health, which I'm going to explore as we go on now. So, what you focus on grows, what you think about expands, and what you dwell upon determines your destiny. And I think this is a statement well worth reflecting, because when we focus on the positive, things develop. And of course, life being life, there will be times we focus, the negative overtakes us, and that can also impact on us. And more often than not, we are far better off to dwell on the positive and to try and build on that. And in that background, the picture for a couple of summers there gone past, we adopted that fox as an abandoned cub, and the family members called her Rua, and that's our Judy or Jack Russell. So what's the aim of this session? Basically, it is to equip you with the knowledge and attitudes necessary to understand, foster, and enhance your mental health and well-being. And it's not to say that you don't already do that, but maybe to enhance it is the key word, maybe to explore your own understanding of it by looking at what mental health and well-being is. What are the risk and protective factors for mental health and well-being? We tend to know as farmers, members in the agricultural sector, what are the risk factors in terms of health and safety. But do we stop and think about what are the risk and protective factors for my mental health, my well-being? And then how can we use those 5 ways to well-being as a helpful daily coping strategy, just perhaps not for yourself, but also for the family. And those 5 ways are connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and give. And we'll explore them in more detail. So there we go, a tractor, not an unfamiliar sight, the battery charger. And of course, we're now living in an age where all in terms of eco-friendly, the battery powered tractor. There are even battery-powered airplanes being developed. But the point is about that is, if that battery goes flat, your tractor is rendered useless. And it's pretty well the same for us in life. We can charge it up, but we must also charge up our own health and well-being. And looking after ourselves is the key first point in all of that. Taking care of ourselves, very important to keep ourselves charged up. So Mental Health Ireland, national voluntary organisation. If you Google Mental Health Ireland, you will come across some amazing resources. And at the outset of COVID, going back to early 2020, I should say, our key message was connect, communicate, and reassure. And that message is really important, COVID or no COVID. It's very important that we connect with our family, our friends. Very important that we communicate how we're feeling, how we're coping, both good and bad times. And then, when we start that connecting communication, we can reassure ourselves. So they're a very important concept, connect, communicate, and reassure. And again, hopefully this session will be a support in that regard. So, is mental health the elephant in the room? What are the opportunities and challenges to starting and are responding to conversation on mental health in your home, on the farm, or in your community? Like, can we, you know, sometimes it can feel like a barrier to it. What are people going to think? So for the month of June, and primarily June 21st, nationally, we ran a campaign, Hello Westmeath, how are you? And the aim of the campaign was to encourage people to talk about how are you. And I linked in with a neighbour, Brian Daly, and he actually has a Moocall jacket on him, and to have a chat with him about, you know, the importance of speaking about that. So if you go to Facebook, you'll get lots more information on that. But having that conversation can make all the difference. The question is, would you fly with this pilot at the controls? What's the image? What's the perception? The story is he flew that plane into Sacramento. He was coming off the plane and he noticed, you know, passengers were having their 15, 20-minute coffee break for their onward flight. He was coming off to join the passengers likewise, met a lady there at the exit door, and he said to her, "Ma'am, would you like a cup of tea or coffee?" And she said, "No, but my dog Buddy would." So the guys are kind of watching from the airport building to make sure they wouldn't miss their flight, and they see the pilot disembarking and arriving as is. And of course, what did they think? My goodness, he's blind. And say, we're not going back on that plane. And you see, it was all about perception. He, in Sacramento, put on his sunglasses, took the lady's dog, because she was blind, and he brought his bag. And you see, this is what can block us. This can be the barrier to that conversation. What will people think? People can jump to conclusions, misinterpret, misunderstanding. But if we can kind of move beyond that barrier and have that conversation, I think we can all cope with having that conversation about mental health and not feeling uncomfortable about it. So the question is, how can we support each other? So this is just a nice short video clip I'm going to play.
Whoa. Can I help you?
We're John's mates. Is he around?
Yeah. He's over there.
Cheers, mate.
Right, John. All right, boys. Want to sit down?
Sit down. 1 in 4 of us will fight mental health problems this year.
You can do this, John. We're with you.
Hang on with you, mate. Having a mate in your corner can make all the difference. So if your mate's acting differently, step in.
Here we go now, the bell's down.
Search Time to Change.
So the statistic is 1 in 4. But you know what? The 1 in 4 doesn't really matter because we're all that 1 in 4. But what matters is that we can feel comfortable about having that conversation. If we feel we're languishing, or feel we're stuck in a rut, that we can open up. And if there's a positive response to that conversation, then we can all open up and feel comfortable about talking about how we're feeling, how we're coping. In the same way, perhaps we'll talk about having an injury or having a bad headache. So putting all of this into context in terms of health, the environment in which we live, and you know, we're focusing on farming. Farming is a very unique, a very special type of environment. It is challenging, and I know, like, you know, whether you're farming in Ireland or at the other side of the world, you know, farming is farming and very much dependent on the environment in which it's operating. And it can have, you know, the weather can have a devastating effect, as we know, and it can be challenging. And right in there, the core of this is our society, and society has a lot to say about a lot of things, and it can often impact on us, the media and what's being brought to the fore. But right in the core of it all are these core petals: physical, mental, spiritual, social, sexual, and emotional. And our focus is on mental health. But the thing is that all of those inner circle there, all those inner petals, they're all codependent on each other and how we are. And I'm going to explore those further. But one of the kind of the spirituality, we live on farms. There's a lot of spirituality around farming, but are we so busy that we don't stop and take in the lovely scenery that's in farms, in terms of nature, in terms of wildflowers, in terms of crops growing, the animals, all of that, because we're so busy working. And the social side of things, I cannot ever overemphasize that, because when we're stressed, when we're anxious, it's very important that we can turn to family and friends to have that conversation to support us. And then sexuality, like that's, it's not just him and her, them and us. It's also about same-sex marriages, same-sex relationships, and it's about respecting them. And we are thankfully living in a much more informed and much more engaged and supportive society in that regard. And the emotional I'm going to come back to, because sometimes people will say to me, Finola, why would you be bothered talking about emotions? Why don't you talk about emotions and not mental health? But you see, our emotions impact on our mental health and how we're feeling and how we're coping. And they're two very different things. And so, when we think of physical health, are we thinking about being energetic, being able to do a day's work on the farm, able for it, no injuries, no headaches, no aches or pains? When we think of mental health, what comes to mind? And I'll give you a moment to think about that and what might come up. And invariably, when we do this exercise in a live presentation, people will talk about depression, they'll talk about stress, they'll also talk about happiness, peace of mind. And mental health is all encompassing. And mental health is far much more than the absence of mental illness, because there's a massive mind and body connection that sometimes people think of, the mind and the body as separate, but in actual fact, they are very interlinked. Because like if you have a physical pain, if you have a physical ache, that translates to the mind, and the mind says, I don't like that. And that pain can be traumatic, it can be upsetting, and vice versa. Like if the mind is worried, maybe anxiety, maybe stress, maybe elements of depression creeping in, how does that affect you physically? And it's very important that we always remember this, that the two are interlinked. So if you had to shave with your non-dominant hand because you've broken your good hand, you have to make your mind and body coordinate to do that. Or, to be the same if you had to drive a tractor, drive if you were in the continent on a holiday, you're so lucky that, you have to adjust to all that way of thinking. And that's the mind and body, they're never separate, and they do impact on each other. And really, it's about, as this statement says, defining mental health. I'm not sure that you can absolutely define it, but this gives us an idea of what we're saying when we're talking about mental health. So mental health can be a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stress of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So basically what that's saying is it's like about well-being, it's about getting on with life, coping with your normal stresses. And we all can respond to stress differently. And we're up and about and getting out. It's the World Health Organization definition. So that's relevant in Kenya, in the same way it can be relevant in Kerry. Mental health describes how we think and feel about ourselves and our relationships to others, and how we interpret events in everyday life. It also relates to our ability to cope with change, transition, and significant life events, and to understand how to deal with the stresses that often come our way. And that's quite, relevant one, the Department of Health in 2020. And like, it's a good definition because it's about how we interpret events in everyday life, our ability to cope with change, transition, and significant life events. And I don't need to really say it, but obviously coming through the pandemic, dealing with COVID has been one of the major life events, and how people have responded to that. But that's been worldwide. But at everyday level, we might have to deal with change in our living circumstances, relationships, and these are the significant life events. Maybe family members leaving home, maybe immigration, all of that. And that's all part of how do we think about that? How do we cope with that? How do we feel about that? And then there's a good old fashioned dictionary definition. Mental health is a state of health of somebody's mind. But you know what? They're all related, the mind and the body, and how they interact, and the brain. So essentially what we're saying then is a kind of a 3-step approach to mental health: relationship with yourself, including confidence and self-esteem. So how do you feel about yourself? And don't forget, like, our confidence and our self-esteem can vary, can fluctuate. Relationship with others, positive social interactions and communications. And that kind of brings me back to the holistic approach of health that we talked about earlier, that it's so important that we maintain friendships with family, friends, with, we've inspectors, advisors coming onto our farm, relatives, external agencies. How we get on with these people can make such a difference. And sometimes we have to work harder at those relationships. And last but not least, our ability to cope with life's demands using healthy coping mechanisms. And therein lies our 5 ways to well-being as one such healthy coping mechanism. And I guess when we think about healthy coping mechanisms, sometimes your mind can think about what are the unhealthy coping mechanisms. And often, of course, that can be alcohol, that can be abuse of for some people, it could be abuse of drugs. And sometimes can be, not minding your health, being careless and neglectful of yourself. So, but our focus is on what are the healthy coping mechanisms. And there we go in our emotions. And I suppose really what I really like to say about our emotions, and to kind of always remember this, like that our emotions are really a behavior signal to how we're feeling. And kind of always remember that, like, so if I'm feeling angry, have I a right to feel angry? Yes, I have, if I'm annoyed about something, but perhaps it's how I manage that anger is really important. Have I a right to feel sad? Yes, I have, if things aren't gone according to plan, if I had an unexpected bereavement, disappointment. And again, it's what I do with that emotion that's really, really important. And when I look after my mental health, when I look after my well-being, I minimize that risk of that being, undermining or threatening my health and well-being in a general way. And when we control our emotions, in a positive way, we're less likely to be angry. We're less likely to kind of feel, what should I say? Maybe, let's face it, from time to time, we might bad words, as we say, and all of that, and we can be in better control. So always kind of give credit to your emotions. There's a reason for feeling them, and there's a really reason for feeling sad. And then it's actually quite okay to feel that, because, we live in a world where, like, I kind of think it's like a toxic positivity. You have to be happy. Like there are times you cannot be happy, and to allow yourself those moments and to be able to feel free in that regard. So, in terms of farming, we know what's in terms of health and safety. We know what needs, in terms of like using a tractor, shafts, all of that. It's such a big area. We know the protective factors, the gear, if we're spraying, all of that. But are we because if we don't put in those protections, we run a risk of damaging, causing injury, self-harm to our own health and that. But when it comes to our mental health, are we as clear about our protective factors and our risk factors? So our protective factors help enhance and maintain our mental health. And then obviously the risk factors increase the likelihood of mental health difficulties. And like the way I kind of see these is that in life, we do have risk factors, we do have protective factors. So if the risk factor to my mental health is not coping, not sleeping, not minding myself, what are my protective factors? So I need to think and say, I need to look after my well-being. I need to start connecting with people. I need to know that back to my self-confidence. I need to like myself. And these are the things that can address that balance. And always kind of remember that where there's a problem on one hand, there's always a solution on the other hand. But when we're stressed, when we're anxious, sometimes we forget to think about that. So it's good to have this kind of idea in your kind of personal toolbox for what do I need to do when things aren't going well. And the question then kind of begs itself, is mental health, does it exist in a continuum? Like, does it go from mental health to mental illness? And, there's characters there in that kind of continuum, and where might any of us be? But in actual fact, health is like a circle. It goes around and around, and it's about closing that circle. It's not the either end of a spectrum. And to be always kind of give yourself awareness of that as well, and to keep the circle going. Sometimes the weak link breaks it, but again, that's back to your protective factors and how they can address that. So this Professor Corey Keyes did a very interesting study on flourishing and languishing. It's quite an interesting study. He's worth Googling. He's worth looking up in a TED Talk. So what he came up with in a research study was that, and like it was a psychological study. So what did he come up with? He came up with 16% were flourishing, 54% had what he called moderate to good mental health. 20% had a diagnosis of a mental illness. So what we're talking about there is where somebody actually had diagnosed mental illness such as depression. Somebody maybe with schizophrenia, somebody maybe with an eating disorder, somebody perhaps with an obsessive compulsive disorder. Like the same way, if I have diabetes, it'll be diagnosed. If I have prostate cancer, if I have breast cancer, if they're in the circle, they're diagnosed. And of course, we know all of these are treatable. So too is depression. And always remember that. And then the last area there that he came up with was the languishing. And you know, the person that's languishing, the person that's stuck in a rut. But the important thing to understand about this study is that we can move from flourishing to languishing and languishing to flourishing. And if you were to stop and think, were there days last week, were there moments today that you felt I'm thriving, everything is going great? And was there a day last week where you felt, oh my God, I'm stuck in a rut, nothing is going right for me? And we'll have days like that. And none of it is static. And that's why, you know, health isn't on a continuum. It's a circular kind of motion. And what does that look when you're flourishing? You're feeling good about life. You're optimistic about life. These are just some suggestions. You're able to create change and get on about it. You can keep stress at low levels because you're looking after it. But what's happening with the poor mental health, the languishing? Does the person feeling hollow, empty, kind of stuck in a rut, as we say in Ireland, unhappy, feeling you cannot make change? You're just lacking in confidence, self-esteem, feeling isolated, lonely. And like that is such a real issue in life for people in workplaces. They can be feeling lonely and isolated. People in crowded rooms we know can feel lonely, but people, you know, might perhaps in farming might be more vulnerable to loneliness because of access and, you know, the long hours that go with farming. And then, you know, that can lead you prone to stress. But to remind you that we can move from that phase of languishing to flourishing. And of course, when we're flourishing, things we can kind of drop and that. And that's fine, that's part of life. And that's why I kind of say we can't be happy all of the time, but we can watch out for when we're not and what it is we need to do. And to avoid the barriers that might inhibit us from seeking that help, connecting, maybe, you know, having good self-esteem and wanting to do, you know, get that help. And to remember, it's okay not to be okay, because that is life, and that we you know, I know at the risk of repeating myself, we can't be happy all of the time. And to understand that every day may not be good, but there's something good in every day. And to think about that when you're out and about, when you're maybe heading off to bed or wherever, and think, well, what was so good about today? And it might be that somebody said, thank you, I appreciate what you did, or it could be a gesture of kindness on your part. And that all is very energizing for people. So leading up to the 5 ways to well-being, again, we're kind of back to a definition, and it ties in pretty well with that overall concept of health and well-being. So well-being is present when a person realizes their potential, is resilient in dealing with the normal stresses of their life, takes care of their physical well-being, and has a sense of purpose, connection, and belonging to a wider community. It's a fluid way of being and needs nurturing throughout life. And like therein lies the key words. And you know, a lot of that has really got to do with health, that well-being, that overall sense of what it is. So, you know, you're getting on with whatever it is, your potential in farming, achieving that. You're resilient. Like sometimes people think resilience is about bouncing back, but for me, resilient is about moving forward and looking to the future and looking to what I need to change when things haven't gone according to plan. And like, what's the normal stress of life? That can vary. You see that key point there, you're looking after your physical well-being. So you're eating a good diet and you're getting exercise in. I know farming is all about movement, but don't forget that's work movement. Like, what physical exercise do you do for your personal well-being? And then that sense of purpose, like, I mean, there's so many positive outcomes from farming that it's very hard not to separate yourself from that and to see that positivity. But that connection and belonging to a wider community. So you're part of a farming community, you're part of a rural community, part of a family community. And that's a fluid way of being and needs nurturing throughout life. And that's the key message. You nurture your when you sow your fields when you sow your trees, when you looking after your animals, when you know they're in foal or they're in calf or they're lambing, you know they have to be fed and they have to be minded and nurtured. And I know people will sometimes say that farmers have a better relationship with their vet, and because you know the vet comes and solves problems, and that's their role, that's their profession, then they perhaps have their GP. So the GP is very important to our general health and well-being at difficult moments. So coming on to the 5 ways to well-being, how can we apply these on a daily basis? Connect, be active, take notice, keep learning, and to give. So I'm going to explore these for a few minutes before we wrap up. So here's a nice short video on them. Just get to play it there. There we go.
Did you know there are things we can do every day to improve our mental health and well-being? Connecting is about building and strengthening relationships with the people around you. We can do this by spending meaningful time with people each day, arranging a day out with friends, having lunch with someone you work with, or joining a sports team in your local community. By giving time to these relationships, we feel happier and more secure, giving us a better sense of purpose. Be active. Look for ways to be active every day. Find something you enjoy. It doesn't have to be a marathon, but something that suits your fitness and mobility. Cycling, gardening, walking, and dancing are all ways that we can get more active. Being active every day causes changes in our brain, which can positively affect our mood. Take notice. To take notice is to be present in the here and now. Pay attention to the world around you. Nature, people, your thoughts and feelings. Becoming more aware of the present moment can help us enjoy the world around us and understand ourselves better. Keep learning. Keep learning is about learning new skills and information about topics that interest us. We can keep learning by trying a new recipe, signing up for a nighttime course, fixing that broken bike, or taking on a new responsibility in work. Learning can boost our confidence and self-esteem, help build a sense of purpose, and help us connect with others. Give. Giving is about small acts of kindness for other people. You could make someone a cup of tea, sign up for volunteering, or offer to help someone you know with a project. You could just ask a friend or someone you work with how they are, and really listen to the answer. Giving back to others can create positive feelings and help us feel more satisfied with life. Each of the 5 ways have been shown to make a positive difference in how we feel and live our life. By including these simple actions every day, we can improve our mental health and well-being.
So I'm just going to move on from that. And like the key message there is these 5 ways can help improve and support a healthier lifestyle. And I'd just like to look at them from the point of view of being a member of the farming community. To connect, like I did say earlier on, that social involvement is crucial. You know, about talking to a trusted friend, family members, perhaps neighbors and friends. You know, and we'll have lots of different types of conversations with people. But what's really important is to connect when you're feeling maybe perhaps worried or concerned, because it's when we talk we can get support and we can alleviate the problem. And that's kind of that protective factor on what, you know, I put my protective factors on my left hand. When I have my risk factor, I say, what's there in my left hand that can help me? Talk. To be active, again, I fully appreciate, and I see it regular in my home here. Like, you know, they often put the step challenge up there, and they've come back and they could have done 30,000 steps, you know, because they're out and about in the fields, down the laneways, you know the crack as it is as a farmer. So, but you know, it's important to be active for yourself, like aside from your work, and what that might be. So it might be getting involved in something, maybe volunteering, maybe taking up kind of a new interest in that. So find alternative ways to being active, other than, you know, because we tend to think of activity as physical exercise and that. So it might take up a bit of cycling, maybe a bit of jogging, join an exercise group, you know, if keep fit class, just just for your own general well-being, because it is quite well established that, you know, farmers, because they, you know, they have a 24/7 routine, that maybe they don't always have the proper meal routine, and maybe, as we might often say, kind of in the tractor coming through a town and picking up the fast food meal. So be careful of your diet and that. So again, you know, we talked about, you know, take notice. So take notice when you're beginning to feel stressed or tense. Stand back and take a rain check. And that's so important, because if you can take notice of like how you are, and this is why it might be important to have a regular checkup with your GP, and like what would be the signs, maybe weight gain, maybe loss of weight, maybe not sleeping well, maybe difficult making up, you know, in terms of your mental health and well-being, the mind aspect of our health, you know, not able to make your mind up, being confused about decisions. And then maybe, you know, in terms of the behavior, maybe you're not just interested in getting involved and withdrawal, and that's kind of the languishing piece. So kind of being mindful of that. But more importantly, it's about also finding that spot to enjoy nature in your. So this again is a reflective piece from J.G. Murphy, and J.G. runs, you know, he's got involved in farming in recent years, and he's very into mindfulness and that. So I'm just going to play, it's only literally 2 minutes, so maybe give yourselves 2 minutes to join in with his reflection. So you just need to tick it on there. Oh God, there we go. Sorry. Okay.
Sitting or standing, make sure you're comfortable. Remember, this is your time. The rest of the world will look after itself, but for now, there's only you. Eyes closed. Keep a mild focus between the eyebrows. We begin with one deep inhalation through the nose, and a long and deliberate exhalation through the mouth, grounding yourself to this moment. Now relax and let your body breathe by itself. There's no need to do anything. Just feel your body breathe as it finds its own natural rhythm. Watch as you inhale. Feel the coolness of the air as you breathe in. Feel the warmth of your breath as you breathe out. Notice how the temperature changes. The coolness as you breathe in. The warmth as you breathe out. All the while never interfering with the breath. Breathing in the coolness. Breathing out the warmth. Really feeling a sense of letting go. Body, mind, letting go. Breathing in, out. In the coolness. Out the warmth. Slowly, gently open your eyes. Take a moment and pause, noticing any relaxation that you feel.
Sorry, I moved on a little bit faster. So, but you get the kind of the sense, just take time out. Sometimes it can be simple, just take in a deep breath and let it out. And that can sometimes be so much better than maybe, as we might say, losing the cool. And then to keep learning, to encourage you to stay in contact with adult education in your local area, your Teagasc advisors, your library. You know, it's free to join your library. You can download books, you can download so much more, like your daily paper and that, and to make time for that. And again, that can be online. So to keep learning, like over and above kind of what you need to know in terms of farming, and to give, like it's all very good to give, but it's also very important that you give time to yourself, that you mind yourself. And, you know, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. It's never too late to start, but give yourself self-care, give yourself recognition, look after yourself, treat yourself. It's very, very important, you know, in terms of your own well-being. And we've developed this worksheet. It's available to download off our website, you know, in terms of the 5 ways, and just have a look at, you know, am I good at connecting? It's not always about the always. Just check in, you know, some of us are really good at connecting, but maybe not so good at being active. And to look at in that scale of 1 to 5, are there areas that I can develop? And what we're saying there is, what are the things I can control? There's a lot of things we can control. I can control my health, my well-being, by looking after myself, my nutrition. Perhaps I can't control the way COVID or there's certain things are at the moment, but I can look after my health. And to put the things that are outside your control and leave them there, but really give the energy to what it is you can control. So take a rest. A field that has rested gives a beautiful crop, and well, we know it in terms of the farming community. That's really important. You know, make hay while the sun shines, work hard, of course, but also give yourself rest, because, you know, we can't be burning the candle at both ends, as we know. I would encourage you to go into our website. We have a farming resilience section there that we develop, and those meditations from JG and lots of other resources, free to download, free to access, or you can always email the organization and they will send out these publications to you. And so I started with Laura Ingalls, and now here's her kind of concluding. Life was not intended to be simply a round of work, no matter how interesting and important that work may be. A moment's pause to watch the glory of a sunrise or a sunset is soul satisfying, while a bird's song will set the steps to music all day long. And mark you my words, you know, living on a farm, we've such access to all of that. You know, the glory of the sunrise, the sunset, the sound of the birds, the blowing of the trees. And that's not always available to people living in towns and apartments. And we have it on our doorstep for free. So to take time out and take that moment, as JG has spoken about. So I'd like to say thank you. I'd particularly like to say thanks to Cindy for organizing this, and hope you found this session helpful and that you will visit our website. I'm on Twitter at Finola Colgan and often have good, interesting articles. So thank you.